The HOA president's voice cracked as the detective read the charges: mail fraud, attempted extortion, and harassment. She had stormed into my yard with a folder, demanding I pay $80,000 in past due HOA fees for a neighborhood I didn't even live in. 2 months later, she was the one writing checks to her lawyer. My name is Daniel Reeves, an industrial electrician who bought a small fixer-upper on the edge of Meadowbrook Estates, specifically because it was outside the HOA boundary. My property deed spells it out in black and white. Not subject to Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners-Association bylaws. No dues, no drama. That was the entire point. Then came Karen Stanton, the HOA's queen bee. At first, it was just little notes. On my door, reminders that dues were $250 a month. I ignored them. Then came certified letters, each larger than the last, adding late fees, special assessments, and interest. By month 6, her fictional bill had ballooned to $80,000, a debt she claimed dated back to before I even owned the house. When I laughed and tossed her letter, she sent 2 collections agents to my driveway. The morning started like any other Saturday. I was replacing the weather stripping on my garage door when a white sedan pulled up. 2 men in cheap suits stepped out, clipboards in hand. "Mr. Reeves," the taller one said with practiced authority, "we're here regarding your outstanding debt to the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. I set down my screwdriver. "I don't owe the HOA anything. I'm not a member." The shorter one flipped through his papers. "According to our records, you owe $80,000. "Your records are wrong," I said calmly. "This property has never been part of your HOA." They exchanged a look. The tall one stepped forward. "Ms. Stanton authorized us to begin asset evaluation if you refuse to cooperate." I couldn't help but laugh. "Asset evaluation? You mean you're going to stand here and guess how much my truck is worth?" I pulled out my phone. "How about I call the real police and we discuss your trespassing?" They retreated to their car faster than I expected. As they drove off, I knew this wasn't over. Karen Stanton had just escalated from annoying to potentially criminal. The next week was a campaign of daily harassment. Karen herself appeared at my door 3 times. The first time, she wore a power suit that had seen better decades and carried a folder thick enough to use as a weapon. "Mr. Reeves," she began with false sweetness, "I'm trying to help you. If you just pay what you owe, we can avoid any unpleasantness." "Karen," I replied, "I've shown you my deed. I've shown you the map. My property is 20 feet outside your boundary." Her smile tightened. "Everyone in this neighborhood pays their fair share. You're not special." "Actually," I said, "according to the legal documents, I am exactly that, specifically excluded from your association." She huffed and stormed off, her heels clicking aggressively on my driveway. The second visit, she brought backup. 2 other board members, standing behind her like mob enforcers as she waved a stack of papers. "These are the bylaws," she announced, triumphantly. "They clearly state that all properties within a half-mile radius are subject to HOA governance." I didn't even open my door fully. "Those bylaws don't supersede property law, Karen. My deed predates your HOA by 15 years. One of them tried to look intimidating, muttering, "We have lawyers, you know." I replied flatly, "Good for you. So do I." The third visit was pure Karen. She came alone at 7 a.m., pounding on my door. When I answered in my bathrobe, she was practically vibrating with rage. "You think you're so clever?" she hissed. "I've been running this HOA for 12 years. I know every trick in the book." "Apparently not the one where you check property boundaries," I said, sipping my coffee. Her face turned an alarming shade of purple. "You'll pay every cent, plus the new penalties I'm adding. Karen, the only thing I'm going to pay for is a restraining order if you keep showing up at my house." She spun on her heel, shouting over her shoulder for the whole street to hear, "This isn't over." She was right, but not in the way she thought. Karen made her biggest mistake when she filed a lien against my property with the county clerk, signing under penalty of perjury that I was an HOA member in arrears. I went to the clerk's office with my deed, the subdivision plat, and a 2003 amendment that explicitly excluded my parcel. The clerk's eyes widened. She called a detective over from the sheriff's office right there at the counter. Detective Morrison was a no-nonsense woman who looked at documents like they might contain state secrets. She spread my papers across the counter, then pulled up Karen's lien on her computer. "She signed this under penalty of perjury," Detective Morrison said slowly. "Says here she's acting as a duly authorized agent." "That's the problem," I said. "She has full knowledge. She knows I'm not part of the HOA. The detective's eyebrows rose. "Can you prove she knows?" I smiled and pulled out my trump card, a folder containing emails, recorded messages, and most importantly, a deposition from a 2010 boundary dispute where Karen herself testified about which properties were excluded. My address was specifically mentioned. Detective Morrison's expression shifted. "This is serious. If she knowingly filed false documents with the county, it's fraud," I finished. She agreed, taking copies of everything. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," Detective Morrison said, gathering the papers, "I have some questions for Ms. Stanton." During questioning, Karen doubled down, insisting every property in the zip code was HOA-controlled. Then they showed her the documents she'd signed in the 2010 boundary dispute, documents that proved she knew I wasn't a member. That flipped her stunt from a civil mix-up to criminal fraud. Detective Morrison later told me that Karen tried to claim it was an honest mistake, that she'd forgotten about the old case. Hard to forget something when you've sent someone 47 letters demanding payment, Morrison had retorted. Karen, it turned out, had brought copies of all 47 letters to the interrogation to prove I'd been notified, helpfully documenting her own harassment campaign. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Karen was arrested on a Thursday morning. In front of her house, as several neighbors just happened to be outside. The local paper ran the headline, "HOA-President faces fraud, charges over false lien." My lawyer was having the time of her life. "In 30 years, she told me, I've never seen someone document their own crimes so thoroughly." Karen had even noted in HOA meeting minutes that she was pursuing collection against my property, despite technical boundary issues. Instead of me paying $80,000, Karen got arrested. The lien was erased, and I filed a civil suit for harassment. Neighbors told me she skipped the next HOA meeting because she was in court in an orange jumpsuit. The criminal trial was swift. The prosecutor, armed with boxes of evidence Karen had provided herself, stated clearly, the defendant knew for over a decade that the victim's property was not part of the HOA. She testified to this fact under oath. Yet she pursued a campaign of harassment, intimidation, and ultimately fraud to extract $80,000 from him. When it was my turn, I simply laid out the facts. The notes, the letters, the escalating demands, the fake collection, agents, and the fraudulent lien that could have cost me my home. The prosecutor asked, "Did you ever give the defendant reason to believe you were part of the HOA?" "No," I replied. "I specifically bought the property because it wasn't." I showed her my deed multiple times, and she continued to demand payment. She said I'd pay every cent, plus new penalties. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts, mail fraud, attempted extortion, and harassment. Karen's jaw dropped as the verdict was read. She stared at me, unable to comprehend how her perfect plan had failed. The civil suit was settled out of court. She tried to steal $80,000 from me and ended up paying me $50,000 in damages. But the best part came at the emergency meeting to remove her as president. It was a unanimous vote. The sentencing came 3 weeks later. The judge, unimpressed with Karen's lack of remorse, handed down 18 months in federal prison for the mail fraud charge, plus plus 3 years probation and $30,000 in fines. Karen's expression was one of pure shock, mixed with indignation, as if she still believed she was the victim. Her lawyer had to physically guide her back to her seat as she kept muttering, "But he owed the money. He owed the money."